There is a debate in the field among mental health professionals regarding the terminology, the resist-refuse dynamic, other terms such as parental alienation, parent-child contact problems, estrangement, and attachment theories, etc. So as a mental health professional myself and as a lawyer, I feel as though it's incumbent upon me to try to clarify some of these terms in a manner that reflects how we think today. However, the terminology could change. Legislation comes down that changes. The scholars create new research studies to change the terminology, and so therefore right now as a lawyer, I'm going to say I reserve the right to modify what I'm going to explain today. The way I understand the resist-refuse dynamic is that it's sort of an umbrella term that explains when a child or children in a high conflict divorce or separation, the child is resisting and refusing contact with one of the parties. So for the sake of understanding, because this happens in heterosexual relationships, it happens in same-sex relationships, we're going to use parent A as the parent that's favored and parent B as the parent that's being rejected. So I consider the resist-refuse dynamic, and we abbreviate that with RRD, is an umbrella. And inside the umbrella of the dynamic where a child is resisting and refusing contact, there can be other terms. For example, there can be an element of parental alienation. Now, that term has been is a hotbed of discussion because the term originally was created in the 1980s by Richard Gardner. He coined the term parental alienation syndrome, PAS. That syndrome terminology has been largely rejected. In addition, the new term for parental alienation is either parental alienation theory or alienation. That term is also being rejected by advocates in the DV community, the domestic violence community, because, frankly, the phenomenon of parental alienation, which is real, has been used by one of the parents in litigation in order to hide, perhaps, domestic violence or domestic abuse. So I'll just briefly define domestic violence. For the purposes of this discussion, it's a much larger definition, but domestic violence can also be called intimate partner violence, and scholars may disagree that those are synonymous terms, but this is violence that occurs either physically, emotionally, verbally, or sexually between parties that have been, or people who have been in an intimate relationship. So unfortunately, inside the umbrella of resist-refuse dynamics, when a child is involved, if the parties have had an intimate partner relationship, and then the child is resisting and refusing contact, we've had people, lawyers or parties, accuse the other side of parental alienation to hide the fact that they have perhaps committed intimate partner violence or domestic violence. And so without getting confused, because these terms are very related and they can be very related, I like to keep everything under that umbrella of the resist-refuse dynamic. So if you have parental alienating behaviors that can then cause a child to resist and refuse contact with a parent, then that might be one of the elements inside the umbrella of the resist-refuse dynamic. In addition, there could be domestic violence or intimate partner violence that has occurred which would cause a child to reject and refuse contact with their abuser. In addition, there are terms such as protective parent. So for example, let's say parent A has been abusive to parent B, and parent B then wants to protect the child or children from further abuse. They might call themselves, parent B might call himself or herself the protective parent. However, in a case where there might be parental alienation, which scholars are saying parental alienation is a psychological form of child abuse, because let me just define parental alienation, even though this isn't the formal accepted definition. Essentially, parental alienation is when a parent weaponizes a child to reject a previously loved parent for no legitimate justification. So in a case where there might be parental alienating behaviors and a child resists and refuses contact with the other parent, then it's important to determine whether that child is resisting and refusing contact because they're trying to please a parent who's coaching them, or if that child is resisting and refusing contact because the other parent has actually harmed the child. I'm actively involved in bringing the polarized scholars together to come up with operational definitions that we can all agree with in order to then educate the bench officers, to educate the lawyers, the minors' attorneys, guardians ad litem, the mental health professionals, etc., so that we're all on the same page. And then we can begin to formulate solutions for these problems when we're not infighting about the terminology. Inside the resist-refuse dynamic umbrella, so to speak, is parent-child contact problems, which scholars say, some scholars are saying today, that they're the synonymous terms. Resist-refuse dynamic is the same as parent-child contact problems. I disagree. Here's why I disagree. There can be a resist-refuse dynamic where a child is resisting and refusing going to parent B's house, for example, because parent B has a different type of spaghetti sauce that they use to prepare dinner. And the child doesn't want to have dinner at parent B's house because they don't like the spaghetti sauce. Maybe that child has special circumstances and they require their food to be prepared a certain way. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's parent-child contact problems with the rejected parent. No, it just might mean that the parent is preparing spaghetti sauce in a different way and the child is resisting and refusing to go to that parent's home because they don't like the food. So I don't believe that resist-refuse dynamic and parent-child contact problems are exactly synonymous. However, the scholars are working on the operational definitions even today as I'm filming this. In addition, inside that umbrella of the resist-refuse dynamic is a phenomenon called estrangement. Once again, this definition is not the formal definition, but essentially when a child is estranged from a parent, and we hear that all the time, people use the terminology and maybe they don't know the clinical or the operational definition of the term estrangement. But estrangement essentially means that there's a legitimate justification for why the child is rejecting a parent. Again, I believe it falls under the umbrella of the resist-refuse dynamic, but estrangement is justified. Maybe the parent has been overly punitive with regard to the way they rear their child, and therefore the child is resisting and refusing contact with that parent, and that parent is justifiably estranged. Inside the umbrella of the resist-refuse dynamic, we also look at attachment theory. And scholars today go back and forth about the origins of attachment theory, how a child and a parent or a caregiver attach in a healthy way. But there can also be something called enmeshment. So enmeshment, again, would be inside that umbrella of a resist-refuse dynamic. Here's an example of enmeshment. Let's say a young girl is enmeshed with her mother, the favored parent. So if parent A is a mother and she has a daughter and they share activities to the point that the daughter doesn't develop her own identity in a healthy way and separate healthily from her mother, then there can be some enmeshment, and it can be toxic or pathological, which then could potentially create the resist-refuse dynamic. And the child doesn't go to parent B's house because she's overly enmeshed with her mother and can't make decisions without convening and communicating with her mom. So she can't separate in a healthy manner. The resist-refuse dynamic is a hotbed of contention and requires that the polarized positions come to a meeting ground where they can operationally define these terms for the best interest of the children that are caught in this conflicted system. Because in family law, when the family court is involved, unfortunately, children are harmed or can be harmed because of the conflict and the adversarial nature. So it is in the best interests, at least in my opinion, for the mental health professionals and the people who coin these terms and create the definitions to come to an agreement for the families that require their help. In addition, it's important and incumbent upon the mental health professionals to teach others, which is why I'm putting this video out, in order to help create solutions on behalf of children who are caught in conflict. If you have questions about the operational definitions, or if you have a family law matter where you require advocacy, contact Griffin, Donnell & Associates at griffindonnell.com.